Welcome to the Health Coach Nation podcast. My name is Hailey Rowe. I'm a sales and marketing coach and strategist for health coaches, life coaches, and wellness professionals who want to become a leader in their field by building their online community, rocking their sales process, and finally feeling confident about how they promote themselves and their marketing. On this show, we talk about tips to grow your business, save yourself time, and finally be able to create a sustainable, profitable business. Let's get into it. Today's podcast is brought to you by the Zero to Hero Coach Program. This is my 4-month program teaching coaches and online service providers how to grow your online business, book clients consistently, overcome your sales fears, and finally rock your social media visibility. If you struggle to create a sustainable coaching business, this program is for you. Check out HaileyRowe.com and book your free strategy call with my team or myself today. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm here today with Harry, and I don't want to mess up the saying of his last name. Is it
like Duran?
Duran. Okay. Well, welcome to the show today. We are going to be talking with him. He is an expert when it comes to podcasting, marketing your podcast. He's had his own podcast for quite a while. And so why don't you fill us in on your background and we'll go from there.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Hailey, to share my story with your audience. I think one of the best ways to start is to think about all the ways I've been influenced. I like to joke around sometimes that for the majority of my life, I've been listening to other people's voices. And I remember early on, I was influenced by my father, who would play like these Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill, like these inspirational, I think they were tapes at the time, so I'm surely dating myself. It may have even been vinyl. But he would bring us down to the living room and he would play these because he wanted us to do better and have entrepreneurial vision, which I didn't have at the time. And sort of wish I'd paid more attention to that back then. His dream was for me to go to college, go to Harvard. Unfortunately, that never happened because I got an opportunity in the 9-to-5 world. And when I got my first job, it was sort of like the second voice I was listening to, this new boss that I had. And the moment that you get to wear a suit to work, you think you've made it, right? You're like, okay, I get to, it's 9-to-5, I'm wearing a suit. So obviously this is the pinnacle. And then once I hit like a 6-figure salary, my boss again was like, you realize only like 10% of people ever make it to like 6-figure salaries. So I was just feeling like I was on this right path, but there was still like entrepreneurial voices inside my head. And so I would leave and come back and try different things. At one point, .com craze, 1999. I think if any one of your listeners can remember like pets.com and the craziness around the .com craze. So I actually left my job, cashed out my 401k. I took an unpaid position with a Latino portal startup to try that out. This was like 1999. Unfortunately, that didn't pan out. And so I had to come back to work in the 9-to-5. And what I call now my corporate godfather was helping me get a job and stay in that world. And then the next thing I did was around 2001, I left to go to Atlanta to work in construction, out of all things. So I'm just trying to sort of paint the journey of like, I was trying these different things and trying these other opportunities because I'm like, maybe I can go support that person or maybe I can go help that person. And that was in construction. Like I literally was climbing scaffolds, had a hard hat, and was learning how to read blueprints. But you know what they say about working with family, I ended up with my tail between my legs to go back, live with my parents at age 34, traveled back to New York. So I just want to tell that bit of a background story because I know a lot of your listeners and maybe you can relate to the fact that I spent a lot of time listening to other people's voices as opposed to not listening to my own about what it is that I want to do, what it is that makes me happy. And so I started working on a mobile app. I'm a huge fan of electronic music, so I created a mobile app called Know Your DJ. And I thought I was going to interview globetrotting DJs at the time. This was now 2012, 2013. I realized how quickly that was going to be. I went to a conference called New Media Expo in Las Vegas, and I pivoted. I saw some other podcasters there, Pat Flynn, Amy Porterfield, speaking, and I said, what if I created a show where I interview other podcasters, sort of like Inside the Actor Studio? I don't know if you remember that TV show, but for podcasters. Yeah. And so Podcast Junkies was born, and that's been going strong since 2014, 235 or so episodes, hour-long interviews, and I use video for the conversation. And then a year into that, I hired a business coach because I realized there was a lot I did not know about digital marketing, about building your own business, about being an entrepreneur. And I paid a business coach to help me. And then a year later, I started Fullcast, which is our Done For You podcast production agency.
Wow, what a ride. So I love that the message of following your own voice. And I think that's especially important. Even if you are an entrepreneur, I find that listening to other voices is super helpful, but it can also be, if you let it, go too far and you just are constantly comparing yourself or thinking you need to do a certain thing a certain way just because you keep hearing that, it can cause you to get distracted. It can cause you to feel confused and overwhelmed. So I think it's really, I actually have an old song called Don't Need Your Approval. And it's about doing what you want to do ultimately. And however, I will say that podcasts, and I love that you're passionate about podcasts too. I am so grateful for them. I feel that they've taught me more than any other educational resource I've ever experienced, including college. And it's so me. It's like I am an auditory learner. I learn best when people are kind of interacting. So something about podcasts, we have something that can make you millions of dollars, that can improve your life, that can make you happy, that can teach you pretty much anything you want at our fingertips. And it just blows my mind that more people don't listen to them, take them seriously, and implement what they learn from podcasts. So I want to go back to, you had the genius idea to interview podcasters. So tell me a little bit about, and you said you have a Done For You podcast agency. What does that mean?
So what was interesting, Hailey, and obviously you have a lot of entrepreneurs listening. I didn't know what I didn't know, and I use the example of Narnia, like when you come out of the closet and you're in this whole new world, and that was me, like coming into the digital marketing world, and I started just consuming voraciously all this content and watching a lot of speakers. And I saw someone by the name of Jim Rohn, and he had this quote. And Jim Rohn is someone that's inspired and taught like Tony Robbins. He's popular in the 80s. He says, "You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." And I was like, whoa, I don't have like an entrepreneurial circle. I had a lot of people, 9-to-5ers, right? And no one that can tell me how to build a business. And I started meeting in this group, like people that were building 6-figure, 7-figure businesses. And it was totally blew my mind. And I was like, oh, okay. I felt like I was swimming in the deep end, but I think it was important for me to understand like how to do that. So that's where, and what I was learning from the podcast as well. And I think the power, what I was learning as I was having these interviews with established podcasters, is that they were all specialists in their specific niche, but they all had a unique voice. And I give the example sometimes, like you could give the same show to 5 different hosts and you'll get 5 completely different shows, even if it's the same exact topic, because Hailey, you have experience growing up, where you live geographically, like your family history, your specific passions, the energy and the enthusiasm you have, your personality type. Like when you mix all those together, you're going to come up with a show that's going to attract a certain kind of person. And quite honestly, I tell my clients this as well, like your show should actually repel people as quickly as they attract them, because you don't want to be vanilla. You want to have your personality shine through and let your passion come through in what you do. And to your point earlier about the power of podcasting, it is an intimate medium. I mean, they're consumed. I have earbuds on now, and that's how most people consume podcasts. And it sounds a bit cliche, but you are actually speaking into the ear of the person. And I always say that when you're in a podcast conversation, there's 3 people involved. There's the host, there's the guest, and then there's the listener. And it's really important. I always make the distinction that the listener is singular, because a lot of podcasters, when they get started, they're like, "Hey, you guys, I'm so happy you're all listening to me." And we think we're on stage and we're talking to a big room. But in reality, people are consuming it. One person at a time is consuming your podcast. And so you, the listener who's listening to Hailey and I speak right now, like I'm speaking to you, like Hailey, I know, appreciates you being a listener to her show and you taking the time to listen to this, but this message is directed to you. So just things like that make the medium super powerful, super personal. It's why I'm really passionate about it.
Absolutely. I have to go back to a good tip I learned from Paul Mumford, who was also a guest on the podcast, and I don't follow it because I keep forgetting, but he says, never in your videos and stuff, just say you. It's not you guys. It's not you all. It's somebody on their phone by themselves watching you. And that's your one audience member. And I also think it helps with the nerves when you think of that one person, your ideal client, who it's made for, and speaking directly to that person. And you brought up a good point that podcasting can be so intimate because you're literally in somebody's ear teaching them. You're with them on a walk, or you're with them while they're cleaning their house, or you're with them in their car. And it's so powerful. So when it comes to podcasting and what you do, what are some ways, like, I think, well, actually, I want to bring up one more point. You said you have your own unique voice. And I work with a lot of coaches and wellness professionals and people who think, I'm not unique enough, or who wants to listen to me, or what do I have to say? Kind of this imposter syndrome. And the truth is, you guys, there's going to be, and you guys, I just did it. The truth is, you little listener, that there are people who will not jive with somebody who's like, I think about, let's go to the example of business people. Okay. There's like Mel Robbins and there's Grant Cardone.
Yeah.
Mel Robbins doesn't pretend to be like Grant Cardone and hustle, and talk really fast. And while they're not direct competitors, I'm just kind of giving you an example of the spectrum. You just want to amplify who you are. You don't have to turn on this on-camera persona where all of a sudden you're loud and you're excited. And if that's not you, if you're like a very calm person, you show up, you bring that on camera. And the people who will resonate with that are meant to be in your audience. So what would you say to people who feel like this imposter syndrome, like, yeah, okay, you say I have a unique voice, but I feel kind of embarrassed?
Imposter syndrome never goes away. I still have it. I've heard Oprah Winfrey talk about still having it. It's something that's going to it's something you just have to work through and understand that every single podcaster does not like the sound of their voice and their first episode. Like, I don't care if you talk to Pat Flynn or you may have, I'm sure you've experienced this. I experienced it, Hailey. It's just, you cringe at the sound of like your first recordings. You're just like, oh my God, I'm so awkward. Like, I don't know what I'm saying, but it's just reps. And your 10th one is going to sound better than your first. Your 50th is going to sound better than your 10th, but you have to, over time, find your voice, find a tone. You may mimic other podcasters in the beginning. If you're doing an interview-based show, you're going to have your list of questions. I did it as well. And then I realized, like, I had an interview with John Lee Dumas. I only had half an hour, and we started a little late, and I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to get through these questions. I just want to talk to him like a real person. And so, for those of you that are feeling imposter syndrome, if I took you out of the podcast context and I said, let's go sit down in the lobby of a hotel, or let's go to a bar, and it's just you and your guest on a stool, just sitting, having a conversation, I imagine you're naturally curious and you just ask questions coming from that place, because then you really figure out, like, the best podcast interviews for me are ones where the host has a genuine curiosity. They let the person talk. They're comfortable with silence. From an editing perspective, you can tell when a podcast host is talking more than their guest, because you see the wave file and you're like, oh, okay, like they should probably let the guest talk more. So just lean into your own curiosity in the beginning if you're not feeling comfortable with your voice, or feeling comfortable that you have anything to say, because the questions that you ask a guest, like I said earlier, are going to be very, very different from 5 other hosts who have the same guest, because they're going to be things that they're attracted to, whether it's travel, whether it's a hobby that they have, or they're like a stamp collector. They're going to mention something, you're going to be like, oh, I like that. Like when people mention electronic music or something like that, I light up, because I'm like, I used to be a DJ. I DJ'd on vinyl. So I pull that thread. But realize that, you just have a different life experience. And so just in the beginning, you're going to have some things that are going to be a guide for you, like the question. So you have a framework, but don't feel tied to them. And just come at it from a place of natural curiosity. And again, the imposter syndrome never goes away, but you have an expertise, and you have something you want to teach. And if you are a coach, I know you mentioned you have life coaches, wellness coaches here, your training and your experience and your credentials got you to a point where you're at now, where you're helping people. And I always say you don't have to like help be everything for everyone. And you're not trying to get people like to the 26-mile of the marathon. Like they literally just need from you the next step. You're trying to get them to the place where they want to go as far as the next step, and not the step that you yourself haven't taken. Like you're not going to be able to show anyone that, but they just want to know, hey, that place where you're at now, how did you get there? So I think, sometimes the imposter syndrome comes from thinking, I haven't achieved all these great things that all my peers have. And it's fine. And the people that you're helping specifically, they just want to know how you got to where you're at now. And so it's something helpful to keep in mind. And that's helpful from creating, whether it's podcast content or blog content or your live videos or whatever else you're doing on social.
You nailed a really good point there when it comes to imposter syndrome, coming at it with curiosity. Rather than thinking it's true, I don't have enough experience, I'm not enough, that's the truth, I've only been doing this for 3 months. Why not ask yourself, well, what if I could put out one podcast? What if somebody's 3 steps behind me? What if I can gain confidence by taking action every day? What if, like, come at it with questions, and is this really true, or am I just telling myself something and looking for evidence as to why it's real? Because at the same time, you can look for evidence why it doesn't have to be real or why it's not real. So that tip right there is really good.
Yeah, and I think it's something that you have to be reminded of. There's a post that I shared on LinkedIn recently, the difference between amateurs and professionals. And it's something that I've been coming to, and it was actually written in 2017. And I'll share it with you, and you can put it in the show notes for the listeners. But it's really interesting because, just some of I pulled up the article real quick, but it says amateurs have a goal, professionals have a process. Amateurs don't have any idea what improves the odds of achieving good outcomes. Professionals do. Amateurs focus on being right. Professionals focus on getting the best outcome. And so these ways of thinking that have been helpful for me, like every morning when I get up and I'm like, do I take that extra step, or do I finish my day with that one task, or do I'm going to have time tomorrow, I should push it off. And then I ask myself, what would a professional do? And it's been really, really powerful and helpful for me because I want to hold myself to that standard. And for those that are out of their comfort zone and saying, I don't have anything to say, or I don't know what to write, I'm going to challenge you and say, you may just not want to do the work that's involved and realize that there's reps involved. So I would say, what would a professional do? A professional would put out their first draft, even if it's not good, or record that first episode, even if no one's going to hear it, because just because you record an audio doesn't mean you're going to publish it. So just find all the things and distinguish whether from those things that where you're actually making an excuse as to why you're not taking the next step.
Yes, I love that. And I think the other thing you pointed out earlier was that if you feel like you don't know enough, or there's so much more you need to accomplish, we get so blindsided by not realizing how much that we know that's not common knowledge by our ideal client. Like, there are things where I feel like I've said it 2 million times. I feel like it's common sense. I feel like, doesn't everybody know this? And then I'll share it, or somebody will ask a question, and I'm like, whoa, like, I didn't even realize this training that I had thought I was going to talk about X, Y, and Z. Really, all they needed to know was X, that next step, or that thing that I thought was like, they already know this. This is stupid. Because we try to be so unique and groundbreaking, and like, I have to just drop so much knowledge. But the truth is, sometimes people need the simple things you learned through an experience. The basics. Exactly. Yeah. And even if people cringe at your basics, that doesn't mean there's a quote, I can't remember what it is, but it's like, just because something's common sense doesn't mean it's common practice. So if you are not implementing something, you don't really know it. You're going to keep hearing it, but are you implementing it? So I think you brought up a good point there. Now, I want to go back, because as somebody on this show who's been an entrepreneur, number one, and number two, had a business coach yourself, what were some of the biggest aha moments you realized with digital marketing that were huge lessons or really changed the game for you?
I think I want to stress the importance of having a coach, because when I had a coach and I left, I thankfully had a decent salary, and I was paying a coach $1,500 a month. And I know for people that are coming into this world, for me, that was sticker shock, Hailey, because I was just like, wait, I give you this money, and then I'm like, what are you putting in my hand back? Nothing. But so I'm just like, wait a minute. But what I realized, and it was like an aha moment, like I was paying for his intellectual property, for like the training, and for the ability for him to get me somewhere faster. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go far, go alone.
Yesterday.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
hilarious.
And
if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with a team.
Yes.
My mentor said that to me yesterday.
Yeah. So it was important. And then the other one that I love, I'm probably butchering this one as well, but it says an amateur is expensive, but working with a professional is priceless, or something like to that effect.
We're the same person. I just was talking about that 2 weeks ago. If you want it to be expensive, go with an amateur. If you want it to, what was the second half? Get done, or do it right. Do it right. You're a professional. Yeah.
And I think about creating something that helps people out. I think that was an interesting takeaway for me as I was entering the world of digital marketing, and this realization that there's 4 types of tasks. Those you're incompetent at, those you're competent at, those you're excellent at, and then you're genius. And then as I was like developing this offer, I was like, well, incompetent and competent. My coach is like, you get those off your plate as fast as possible. Think of housekeeping, for example, like have someone to come and clean your house. The excellent is really interesting, because as entrepreneurs, people that have skill sets, professional training, there are things that we do really well, but they're not like your genius, and there's a difference. And so for me, it was like web design. I could do a little bit of HTML, a little CSS. And then one day I'm on my website, I'm spending hours trying to fix something in the sidebar of a graphic. And I just broke down. I just reached out to a friend of mine. I was like, hey, you're a web guy. Can you fix this? Hailey, he fixed it. I think it was like in 5 minutes. It was ridiculous. Wow. I was just like, that's your genius. That's what you do better than anyone else. And I was like, it just clicked for me. And then I realized, okay, this is the big aha. Like, take your annual revenue, break it down, and figure out what your hourly time is worth. What's an hour of your time worth? And if you could pay someone less than that to do a task, 9 times out of 10, you should probably do it, because that's, pay a genius to do their tasks. And then you focus on your genius. And the genius, really, the definition is that one thing that you do almost better than anyone, because it's what you were made for, what you're passionate about, and your mix of life and professional experiences have you just like, it's the type of stuff that lights you up when you're doing it.
100%. That's one of the biggest lessons I think I've learned this year, is that I really do value my time more now than and I do think you need to calculate your hourly rate. I think that you just shared a really good tip there. And if somebody can do something even in 5 minutes, that is so worth paying for, because they're going to do it. Your time you would have still been working on that graphic for hours.
And what's interesting is that maybe I paid him for the hour. I wasn't paying him for the hour. I was paying him for his 20 years of professional training that got him to the point where he can solve something for me in 5 minutes, which is an important distinction. Right.
And well, what you said about paying a coach, what are they going to give back to me? I think that's such a common outlook. And at the same time, though, you really are, everything you buy when it's a professional you're working with, you're paying for their insights, you're paying for their 20 years experience, you're paying for them thinking about you and your problems and all that all the time, and being able to solve them very quickly. So it's less about what exactly am I going to get back? It's more about what's the insight, experience, the trial and error they've gone through, et cetera, that I'm going to now be able to benefit from because of that, because of hiring them.
Yeah. What's the value in what they're giving you? And it's not really like a time for money thing, because I know a lot of coaches in the beginning, they're like, well, how much should my hourly rate be, and what should I be charging them? And they're really conscious of, like, let's say that I'm charging $300 an hour or something like that. Well, I got to give them an hour because they're going to feel that they're not getting enough return. But your objective should be in outcomes. Like, what's the pain point of, like, your student, whoever you're helping out? Like, what is it that they need? They don't need an hour of your time. They need a problem fixed. And so the quicker you can diagnose that problem for them and fix it, then they're going to feel like the value was worth it, whatever the time is, whether it's 15 minutes or whether it's an hour. So I think as coaches, it's important to dial in and be really good at diagnosing people's problems, and learning how to ask the types of questions that say, okay, what were you working with before? What have you tried? What worked? What didn't work? What's your learning style? And where have you failed before? Have you worked with a coach before? And just kind of all these little things to figure out, okay, who am I dealing with, and how do I best get them the solution that they need?
Exactly. And at the end of the day, the people who just grow the most in their business are the ones who are bringing the most solutions, value, etc., to their audience. They're equal. The more relevant the problems are that you are solving, the more business success you're going to have. So when it comes to marketing and digital marketing, when you got into your podcast, what are some marketing tips you have to promote podcasts or whatever somebody's working on?
So it's really important, and some of the guidance we give clients when they're first starting, use SEO best practices that people have done for ages with blogging. Those also apply to podcast. So even the very, very beginning, like the name of a show, don't get too cute. The Two Guys in a Basement podcast, or, wine and champagne. Like, you see some of these shows and they're like, those are fun. But if you're serious about using and leveraging a podcast to build your authority, to build thought leadership, to actually be an extension of your marketing funnel within your business, when people see and hear the show, they should have an immediate reaction as to whether that's something that can help them or not. And one example I give is my partner is a photographer. She's been a photographer for 10 years. She has a program where she coaches other photographers on how to build their business. We help launch our show. It's called Photo Business Help. It's pretty straightforward on what it does. I have a new client who's started and sold an investment company. Now he's teaching others how to handle their investments better. It's called Understanding Investing. So, we're just thinking, especially if you're getting started with 1 million podcasts now in the app plus in the podcast directory, it's even harder for people to get noticed and to make a name for themselves. Don't be too worried about putting your photo on the podcast, because no one knows who you are in the beginning. So really put all the attention on what the show is, the name of the show. And in the beginning, like as you're starting the promotional aspects, do a build up. Don't just wait for my show's up, now I'm going to tell everyone about it. If you are a coach now, if you've been doing any sort of work online, you have a little bit of a community built up, and I would leverage those. I'm reminded of I grew up in New York City, and I'm reminding of like when rap artists would have albums out, they'd have a street team and they'd just like be plastering like light poles with like the album cover. And it's that sort of street team guerrilla marketing mentality. Like early on, if you've got a Facebook group, if you've got a LinkedIn following, if you got people on Instagram that follow you, or just your friends and family, you start an email list, whatever it is, like leave no stone unturned in the beginning and say, hey, I'm starting a podcast. Here's a poll. These 4 names. Which one do you think? Again, get people talking about it. Hey, I just created a first version of the cover art. What do you think? And as you start to build them, they feel like they're coming along the journey with you, especially if you're coaching already. You probably have clients that you work with, you have prospects that you work with. Get their feedback early on and do everything you can to start building up buzz about what it is you're doing. And then the very first episode you record as a podcaster is known as episode 0, otherwise known as your episode trailer. It's a 5 to 10 minute episode, and it's who you are, why you started the show, why the show is important, who it's for, and then if you know what some of the early episodes going to be, tease out some of that content. If it's going to be some names that people recognize in your space, tease that out as well. Let people know what the frequency of the show is going to be, and when they can expect the first episode to drop. The reason that episode is important is because Apple needs at least one piece of audio when you submit a show. And once that show is in the Apple directory, you can tell everyone that the show is live. It'll just show up as a podcast trailer, but people can start subscribing. And that's one of the most important metrics for a new podcast is Apple doesn't really give away their secret sauce about what drives the charts. But just from speaking to fellow podcasters and doing this long enough, one of the metrics that is important is number of subscribers within the 24-hour period. So try to move all that attention that you're getting and try to have it focused on one day. Do a listening party. You can and use these event tools in these platforms, LinkedIn events, Facebook events, like create an event. And it's not a physical event. Everyone knows now whenever they see an event invite because of COVID, it's going to be virtual anyway. Like no one's thinking that you're doing in-person stuff right now, but just create a listening party. So just use the power of these platforms as much as you can. And then I really like the idea of grabbing a domain name specific for the show. So even if you're going to have, like for example, I'm a partner show, Photo Business Help, photobusinesshelp.com, she was able to get that as well. But add the word podcast. So if you're doing SEO marketingpodcast.com, for example, as an example, but also look at the domains .show and .fm. These don't have to be like your final website, but you can also use the redirect feature of a URL. So what you want to think in mind, Hailey, is that when people listen to your show and your URL, it should be super, super clear how to spell it and where to go. John Lee Dumas, famous example, he had entrepreneur on fire when he got started, but then he realized how hard it was to spell entrepreneur and people were not getting to the right domain. So he quickly grabbed eofire.com. So just, again, branding 101, best practices, like when people listen. And then as you're building those first episodes, be thinking about from day one, where do I want to send people? Because the show it's not an entertainment show. And I imagine for most of your listeners, it's something that they want to use as an extension and to build awareness in their business. So send people specifically to I like the idea of a lead magnet. You want to take them away from the podcast and then grab their email. And the easiest way to do that is with a lead magnet. Lead magnet should be super simple. I imagine your listener is very common with this concept, but it's a one-page PDF is the best thing. No one really has time to read ebooks anymore. I know people are sending ebooks out. I can't tell you how many ebooks I have sitting in my Dropbox folders that I'm going to get to at some point, but I don't have the time. So a very effective lead magnet can be consumed within five minutes. It's one-page PDF. You can create it in Canva. But what it should do is show that you have authority in the space and then let people take the next step with you. So for me, I tell people about a group coaching program I have called the Dojo, or I just have them book a 15-minute triage call. And then on that call, I can then see if they're a fit or not. You don't want to book them straight into a sales call because you don't want to get a lot of sales calls for people that may or may not be a fit. So that's why I like the use of a triage call. It's a 10 or 15-minute, sort of like a diagnosing call where you're actually seeing if they're a fit for you, not the other way around. So those are some helpful tips. And we can dive deeper on any of those.
Absolutely. Yeah, I call them an intro call or goals call, something like that. So I think what you said about, there was a lot of things in that. First, make sure that when you are putting out a podcast or any launch you're doing whatsoever in your business, this can apply to your coaching programs too. You kind of want to have a trailer, a teaser. And what do we do when a movie's coming out? You put out ads, you put the posters up around, it's on a billboard, you're getting people aware, they go to press conferences and movie premieres, and they're telling people what to expect, what's it about, who's the stars in it, etc. And then I love how you said, so you can do the same thing with your program, set expectations, give teasers, get people excited about it. Then you put out the podcast and you do set a date. You want to get those subscribers within the 24 hours. And you also want to set the expectations for the podcast. Tell the audience, okay, this is going to be every Tuesday or whatever. Then you keep consistent with putting out new podcasts, and you give calls to action in the podcast to take somebody to the next step with you, which is your lead magnet or a call with you, something like that. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you a little bit about, so because I did this so wrong. My first podcast, first of all, my show used to be a whole different name and a whole different concept. Yeah. And I haven't deleted, I just changed the name and the title and the cover.
That's perfect.
Yeah, well, no, it's not.
Well, the interesting thing about that, Hailey, and I don't want to discourage people from thinking, well, I may want to change it later. Yeah. It isn't ideal, but you were building up a listenership at that point, and you had people already subscribed to the feed. So there's no point in just saying, oh, now I got to start new feed. Now I got to tell people about another show. So just educate people and say, hey, I'm changing gears. It used to be about baking. Now it's about motorcycles, or just, whatever you want to do. Yeah, but it may not be that extreme, but your listener is, I think it's a reminder that they came for you. And I think you may have found this as well. Like, you may have changed the topic dramatically, but they were coming for you, Hailey, at the end of the day. And some of those listeners, wanted to just keep hearing from you, regardless of what you were talking about. So just important to, you don't have to get it right, is what I'm saying in the beginning. And
totally. Well, I'm glad you said that, because it's true that I did not have trailers. I put one out. It's just like, all right, here we go. Had a 2-year hiatus in there. No, just kidding. It was more like 6 months where I started podcasting.
You're like, where are my listeners? Where is everybody? I'm here.
I will say I don't know when in 2019, but maybe not. Maybe we'll just be safe and say 2020. I have been the most consistent I've ever been with my podcast. It comes out every Friday, and we have good guests, and it's been way better this year. But it's all about priorities, right? So anyways, Harry, let's go back to talking about guests and, what should somebody do to, once they have the podcast, it's out and they're talking about it every week, how can they really make this a win and something that's doing well on the charts?
I really like the idea of planning your content and being strategic about what you want to talk about. When we set up shows for clients, we use a tool called Airtable. It's sort of like Google Sheets, but it's Google Sheets on steroids, because it's a relational database, and it's a free tool. The reason that's important is because you can change different views. You can show a grid view, which is like Google Sheets, or you can switch it to Kanban, which is like Trello, which is nice because then you can just move cards around. And the reason we do that is because we want clients to have a commitment. They're typically 6-month or 12-month engagements, but I want them to list out the 26 episodes, even if they just have a word, or even if they just have a number for now, literally just thinking about that visual of where I'm headed, because if you don't know where you're going, how will you know when you get there? So you have to really think about what do I want to think about and talk about, and then you can start to think about themes. I imagine your listener is very good at teaching their content. So take whatever you have and have that as the pillars of what you can talk about on your podcast. I like to use the accordion methodology. Like, if I have my 6 pillars of what we talk about when we launch a show. It's plan, position, the beginning parts of a show, then it's promotion and publishing, and then profiting. So there's different aspects of that I talk about depending how much time I have. But if on the PDF, it has all the 6 pillars. They're just bullet points. If I'm given an hour on a webinar, I can cover those 6 and I can go through a couple of minutes on each, or I'll pick one and deep dive on that. So think about that as you're thinking about building out the content for your show. And then also, if you have guests, think about guests that your objective is to make them look good. I have a mantra that says, treat your guests like gold. Like, your goal should be to build a lifelong relationship with that person. It may or may not happen. Sometimes they just last an hour, which is the conversation. But I've got friends that I've met on my podcast that I'm still friends with, 6 years later, because I come with that intention of adding value and making them shine and making them sound as good as possible, and then doing as much work as possible once the episode is live to promote it to as many people, saying, hey, I had this great guest. And so be really conscious about the content you're creating, but have a plan, because if you don't know what you're going to talk about, then you just start rambling. If you're just teaching content, I like to use the analogy of an espresso shot of content, like maybe 20 to 30 minutes. It should be really powerful and really get to the heart of what you're an expert at. And then you could always tell people, if you want to learn more about that topic, then sign up for my course, sign up for my webinar, have them take the next step with you. But just, I think that the major takeaway, Hailey, is to be intentional about the content you're creating and think about how it fits and mapping it out. You may want to do a 3-part series on keto if you're a health coach, right? And so take advantage of that and say, okay, and this is part 2 of our 3-part series on keto. In case you missed the last episode, which was part 1, you probably want to pause this, go back to that episode and go listen to that, because it's important that you listen to these in sequence. So it's important to take people on a journey and remind them. I like the idea of open loops and callbacks. So if you think about serialized TV like Game of Thrones, like when they first start, they're like, previously on Game of Thrones. You can do the same thing with a podcast, saying, in case you missed last week's episode, I had a great conversation with Hailey Rowe. We were deep diving on all things like entrepreneurship and podcasting. Make sure you check that out. Episode 235. And then, so that's the callback. The open loop is at the end where you tease out the next episode. So tune in next week. I'm going to have a great conversation with Oprah Winfrey. We're going to talk about, interviewing guests and why that's so great, because you never know, someone may have name recognition, or it may be a topic they want to talk about. Or if you're doing a multi-part series, they're going to be like, oh, I want to listen to the next one. So that's important. So you're always promoting a previous episode and then the next episode in every show. And then I like this idea of what I call rolling out the welcome mat. Like every time you start a show, every episode, saying, hey, welcome back. If you're new to the show, what I do for my show, Podcast Junkies, I'm like, hey, it's Harry Duran. Welcome back. If you're new to the show, this is the one where I have fascinating conversations with intriguing podcasters. It takes a couple of seconds, but it's just, you never know when someone's going to find your show, or someone was recommended an episode specifically. So they may just jump into midstream, your episode 56 randomly and just found an episode because they liked the guest. And so never lose sight that you always have new listeners popping in at random times in your podcast episodes, and just always welcome them. So just little tips on how you can make sure that you're really conscious about the content you're creating. You're not just creating a random episode that's out there. Put a lot of intention so you get the most out of it, because you're just getting started and you want to get as much exposure as possible.
Yes, this really is so good, because in the Zero to Hero Coach program, which is my small group program, we talk about how with your content, a lot of people are inspirational, but there's no strategy behind it. They're just throwing stuff out there that they feel like talking about that day. And people do, people come to them and say, oh my God, your content, it just makes me happy. It's so motivational, but there's no transformation. Yeah. There's no transaction. There's no next step. And so I think what you said about planning out first of all, getting clear from a broad view, what are your pillars? What are the topics that you're going to even bring up on this show, and what is not? Because otherwise your podcast can turn into this thing it's so random. On my show, if it doesn't fall under the category of sales, marketing, mindset, and even mine's a little broad, or time management, it's not going to be on the show. So know your pillars, and then make sure you communicate those to your guests so that they know too, and can see if they're fit for the audience. I love the idea of being friends with your podcast friends, because to be honest, the reason why I started my podcast was because I just wanted an excuse to reach out to people who I wanted to talk to.
Yeah.
Right?
It's really powerful, Hailey, and I think it's something that's not as talked about in the podcasting circles, because the first question people start is like, how can I make money on a podcast, and how do I get downloads? And I think they're asking the wrong question, because they should think about how do I build valuable relationships? I like to joke, if you wanted to get awareness within a certain industry, start a podcast, interview 20 people that you look up to that are either colleagues or people that you aspire to meet or want to have a relationship with, and invite them onto the show. Make sure the show has a name that's attractive to them. One of my friends was an engineer, trying to get a new job. I was like, you should start a podcast called Rockstar Engineers and go interview other engineers in the space. Magically, people find time. If you tell people I want to pick your brain or just want to grab coffee, everyone knows that's code for free consulting. So, but if you tell them,
it's like that peeve, that phrase.
Yeah. So, but if you say, hey, Hailey, I've got a podcast called World Changing Entrepreneurs. Is that something you would like to be a part of? And you're like, yeah, because it's a bit of an ego stroke there, but it's also you valuing their time. And so magically, like, yeah, I have time for that. What's funny, this is what's so funny about it, Hailey, is like, it's almost the same exact conversation as if you were going to go grab coffee or pick their brain, because you're asking them things about how they got to where they got to, but you're doing it in the context of giving them a platform and giving them a stage and elevating them and saying, look, you're an expert, you clearly know what you're doing, and I just want to learn along the way. And it's really powerful. Another great example was something I heard, is someone had, their kid was getting ready to go to college, and they started a podcast that was interviewing admissions counselors at universities, which is genius, because if you're about to go into college and you've interviewed 20 admissions counselors, I imagine some of those are colleges you're actually applying to as well. So they'll be like, oh, I recognize the name of that person. That's the person who I just had an hour-long interview show. So be, strategic about who you want to build a relationship with, how you want to build yourself up as, you don't have to be the authority in the beginning. You just have to be the curator. Like, you don't have to be the person who knows all the things about the topic, but you know how to find the people who know the things about the topic. And then you start to be seen as the person who can, like, that network effect of people that can have conversations with those folks.
Yes. And one of the things too, I just want to highlight that you said earlier was making sure that you realize every piece of content you put out there, every interview, etc., could be somebody's first impression of you. So you just reminded me that from now on, in the beginning of the show, I need to say, what the heck is Health Coach Nation? I mean, I have an intro that says that, but I love the way that you said just one quick sentence, just so that people who are out of the loop and confused know what's going on. And then I want to also go back to one thing you said really early in the episode, because I think it brought some gold. You said that when you go back and listen to your first episode, or that first thing you did, you kind of cringe. And I have to say, I don't know about you, but the way that I measure my progress and my growth, and if I'm doing enough as an entrepreneur and putting myself out there enough, is like, I should be cringing when I think about what I did last week. I should be cringing when I think about what I did, what bold thing I did over the weekend. Like, that's how, to me, rather than running away from that and thinking that's a failure and thinking that's a mess, that's the way you grow and you have a higher tolerance for stuff like that. So I just think my take-home challenge for everybody listening today is, I want you to cringe at what you did last week. I want you to go back to your first episode and cringe. That's good.
Well, it's really important as an entrepreneur, and this is something I learned the hard way, to be very comfortable with failure and understanding that you're going to fail. And, everyone loves to use the example of Thomas Edison, like how many inventions he created, and like thousands or something, and only a couple like took off. But be comfortable. It's called failing forward or failing fast. And it's not the problem is not in the failure. I think the challenge for everyone, or the challenge for you listening right now, is to get up, to dust yourself off as quick as possible. And essentially, like, I tried events where I spent $1,000 on Facebook ads, $1,000 on, like, nothing happened. And I'm just like, okay, dust myself off. Like, that didn't work. What's the next thing I can try? That didn't work. That didn't work. That didn't work. What's next? What's next? And just as an entrepreneur, as a coach, and just have that mindset, which, speaks to what you were saying. Just, you're going to realize that, perfect is the enemy of done, right? We've heard that so many times. Just be comfortable with taking imperfect action, and just realizing that, 90% of them may not work, but you have to know what doesn't work before you can figure out what does.
Yes, and that brings me to another quote from one of my past clients, Jennifer Pressimone, who says, stop trying to chase yesterday and instead start creating your tomorrow. Like, learn from it, make peace with it, move the hell on. What is next? So what's your next best choice? What's your next best move? Okay, Harry, you're a DJ. You said you DJ? You DJ?
Yes.
Okay. I sing in a cover band. I don't
know. That's awesome.
So who's your favorite artist, real quick?
Oh, wow. Oh, I'm old school DJ. There's a DJ by the name of DJ Sneak. He's out of Chicago, and he plays a lot of like funky house. Yeah, and so Derek Carter, DJ Sneak, that Chicago house sound is some of my favorite. When I'm in a mood for dancing, that's the one things I miss right now is I would go to like electronic music festivals. I went to one in Detroit called Movement 9 years in a row, and there's something fun about dancing outside with a DJ that I really, really miss. So yeah, those are a couple of my favorites.
Nice. Okay. Sorry, I had to ask.
No, that's okay.
Where can people find you online and connect with you?
Yeah. Before I share that, I'm just going to have one story that came to mind. If you remember when I said I came back from Atlanta, tail between my legs, went to go live with my parents, I had a ticket to Thailand because I bought it when I was in Atlanta. I was like, well, I'm going to go. I don't have a job, but what the heck? I went for New Year's. My friend picked me up. His parents had a house on Koh Samui. We got on a motorcycle. We proceeded to see, he wanted to take me to see these waterfall. So we hiked up to the waterfall. He's on this lookout and he's like, the view from here is amazing. You got to come over here and check it out. So I stepped over to where he was, but I stepped into a stream and I stepped on what must have been the slipperiest rock you can imagine. I went up on the air, landed on my back, and proceeded to be carried over the edge of the waterfall. This is happening like in seconds. Like everything is happening so fast. And I was like, wow, I'm about to be carried over the edge of this waterfall. I stuck out my leg on a rock that just happened to be on the side of the bank and stopped myself from going over. My friend is like pale, eyes as wide as saucers, and he's just like, we were both freaked out for like seconds, and he pulled me over to the side, and I was a bit shaken, and we got to enjoy the rest of the trip. I was there for like another week, and you don't realize these things in the moment, but when I got back to New York, I thought about, wow, it was so crazy if I would have died with my voice still inside of me. And I was just like, whoa. And I was like, oh man. So over the time, I've been thinking about that, and now I've made it my mission to help like 1 million people find their voice. And I want everyone, and I want you listening now to make a decision that, today is the day that you decide that you don't want your voice to die inside of you. And so I wanted to leave your listener with that message because I think it's important, and I think we overthink, and we think we have nothing important to say, but I really feel like everyone has got a story. Every single person that's listening has got a story. So hopefully that's valuable. If you want to connect with me, I've created that lead magnet that I referred to that we were talking about with Hailey earlier, Best Practice. You can head on over to fullcast.co/Hailey. And it's a link there, and it'll download the ultimate podcast launch game plan, the 6 pillars needed to successfully launch your show. Active on LinkedIn daily. So if you want to connect with me, it's Harry Duran, podcast strategist on LinkedIn. Helpful tip if you're trying to build some business to business relationships on LinkedIn. I actually changed my last name, so it says Duran Podcast Strategist. So when I connect with people, I don't have to mention that I do podcasting. They just see it in my name, and I can just have a conversation with them. So that's a helpful networking tip.
I'm going to do that today.
Awesome. And then Harry Duran FC on Instagram and Twitter as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Harry. We appreciate you coming on the show.
And I appreciate you letting me share your story with your audience, Hailey. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. And if you liked it and want to reserve your very own free sales audit, go to haileyrowe.com/strategy-call to book your very own free sales audit. On the call, we'll talk more about the common concerns you get from your ideal clients, how to overcome those concerns, how to coach through objections, how to change your mindset around sales, and improve your sales process so you can be closing and converting more clients. I can't wait to connect with you, and go to haileyrowe.com/strategy-call to take the first step. Thanks so much. Have a good day.